All right, today we are diving deep into an event that just completely shook the world. The moment the United States military went into another country and captured its sitting president. We're going to unpack exactly how this happened, why it happened, and maybe most importantly, what it means for all of us.
And really, it all boils down to this one question, doesn't it? This is the dilemma at the very heart of the whole affair. It pits what some people feel is morally right against what is, actually written down in international law.
Because on January 3rd, 2026, this stopped being a thought experiment. It became real. It was all over the news, sparking a global crisis that, frankly, is still playing out as we speak.
Okay, so let's start with the how. How did this even happen? Well, it was a lightning-fast military operation planned down to the second, and it was called Operation Absolute Resolve. I mean, just look at how quickly this all went down. We're talking about a 1-hour operation to capture a head of state in his own capital. It kicked off at 2 a.m. as more than 150 aircraft flooded Venezuelan airspace. 5 minutes later, boom, the lights go out in Caracas. By 2:30, President Maduro is in custody, and just 30 minutes after that, he's on his way to a U.S. warship. Gone.
And to really get a sense of the scale here, this was not some small covert team. No way. This was a massive show of force. We're talking F-35s, B-1 bombers, Apache helicopters, all descending on a single city for one objective.
So what happens in the immediate aftermath? Well, chaos, basically. You have this huge constitutional vacuum. Venezuela's vice president gets sworn in, but at the same time, the White House makes it crystal clear who they think is in charge, saying the U.S. plans to oversee the transition. Which brings us to the next absolutely huge part of this story, the legal firestorm. Okay, so tactically, it was a success. But was it legal? Was any of it legal? And at the center of this whole debate is this one sentence from the UN Charter, Article 2.4. It's basically the foundational rule of the road for international relations. You can see it right there. You can't just use force against another country's independence or territory. It's designed to prevent exactly this kind of thing.
And the two sides on this could not be further apart. The U.S. says, hey, this was just law enforcement. We were arresting indicted fugitives. But pretty much the entire world of international law experts looked at it and said, nope, this was an illegal military intervention, a textbook violation of national sovereignty.
And it's not just one thing. Legal scholars point to a whole laundry list of violations. I mean, it breached the UN Charter, it had zero approval from the UN Security Council, and it just trampled all over the ideas of sovereignty and non-intervention. And that claim of self-defense, it just doesn't fly because Venezuela wasn't an active armed threat. And it's serious when the UN Secretary General himself weighs in. Calling it a dangerous precedent is a huge deal. It shows a real fear that the so-called rules-based order has been seriously damaged, maybe opening the door for other powerful countries to do the same thing. So this brings us to the global reaction. Because this didn't happen in a vacuum, right? The world was watching, and it immediately fractured, forcing countries to pick a side. Immediately, you had powerful voices just slamming the action, especially from Latin America. Brazil's President Lula called it out, reflecting this deep-seated regional memory of past U.S. interventions. But then, almost in the same breath, you get the complete opposite reaction, which really shows you the ideological split here. Argentina's President Milei came out and praised it, not as an illegal act, but as a much-needed strike against a dictator. And this chart really tells the story. If you look at the numbers, it's not even close. The overwhelming majority of nations, and we're talking traditional U.S. allies and rivals like China and Russia, they all condemned it. Support was really, really limited, coming from just a handful of governments. Okay, so why? Why did this happen now, and why this way? To understand that, you have to look at the bigger strategic picture, what a lot of people are calling a reboot of a very old American foreign policy, the Monroe Doctrine. And really, you don't have to guess at the motive. President Trump laid it out pretty clearly right here. This operation wasn't just about capturing one person. It was a loud physical statement of a new security strategy, a sort of Trump corollary designed to reassert absolute U.S. dominance in its own hemisphere.
Let's break down the pillars of that strategy. First, kick out rivals like China and Russia. Second, get control over resources. And we're talking mainly about Venezuela's massive oil reserves. Third, set an example.
send the message to every other country in the region about what happens if you don't play along. And fourth, bring back so-called gunboat diplomacy, the idea that military force is always on the table.
So let's bring all of this back down to earth. What does this actually mean for markets, for investments, and most importantly, for the people of Venezuela? It is impossible to overstate the importance of this number. Let it sink in for a second. 303 billion barrels of oil. That is the largest proven reserve on the entire planet. So who controls it has huge implications for the global price of energy. Now, if you're an investor, Venezuela is a massive gamble. This table kind of lays out the possible futures. The most likely scenario, the base case, is a slow, bumpy recovery. But look at that pessimistic outcome. There's a very real 1 in 5 chance of a total power vacuum, more conflict, and a humanitarian crisis that gets even worse. And finally, we just can't forget the human cost of all of this. Even before the raid, nearly 8 million people had already fled Venezuela. That's the largest refugee crisis in the history of the Western Hemisphere. This chart shows you where they've gone, with countries like Colombia taking in millions. The fear now is that this new instability could spark a second, even bigger wave. So we're left with this really unsettling question. The U.S. achieved its military goal, but in doing so, it may have opened a Pandora's box. It forces us all to ask, in a world where a powerful country can break the rules to get what it wants, who exactly is there to enforce the rules on them?